He was the man tasked with ensuring the Son of God was truly dead, plunging a steel spear deep into the side of Jesus Christ. But as blood and water spilled from the wound onto the dust of Golgotha, this Roman executioner experienced a transformation that history can barely explain. How did a hardened soldier of the Roman Empire go from carrying out an imperial death sentence to dying as a sanctified martyr for the very man he killed? What if the most famous weapon in human history belonged to an executioner who eventually chose to lay down his own life for his victim? Beyond the medieval legends of the Holy Lance lies a shocking, historically grounded story of a political enforcement officer who traded his imperial armor for a saintly shroud. Is anyone truly beyond the reach of divine redemption, even the man who pierced the heart of the Savior? This is the incredible investigation into Longinus, a high-ranking Roman executioner whose life took a radical turn from the dark shadow of the cross to the brilliant light of the resurrection. To understand the magnitude of Longinus's transformation, we must first immerse ourselves in the cold, brutal reality of first-century Roman military power. In the year 33 of the Common Era, the province of Judea was a simmering cauldron of religious fervor, political unrest, and anti-imperial rebellion. Overseeing this volatile territory was the fifth Roman prefect, Pontius Pilate, backed by the iron fist of the Roman legions and local auxiliary cohorts stationed at the Antonia fortress, an imposing military citadel built directly alongside the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. At the heart of this military machine stood the Roman Centurion, a professional officer commanding anywhere from 60 to 100 legionaries or auxiliary infantrymen.
To earn the rank of centurion, a soldier had to display exceptional bravery in battle, unyielding loyalty to Caesar, stern discipline, and an absolute desensitization to human suffering. These officers were not mere guards. They were the enforcement arm of an empire that maintained order through calculated public terror. In the Roman worldview, public execution was not merely a punishment. It was a psychological weapon designed to crush any thought of rebellion against Rome. Crucifixion, known in Latin as servile supplicium, was reserved for slaves, political rebels, and those convicted of high treason. It was a prolonged, agonizing spectacle engineered to strip a human being of all dignity while inflicting maximum physical agony over hours or even days. The centurion assigned to supervise a crucifixion was responsible for every phase of the execution.
He was the commander on the ground who ensured the prisoner was flogged with the brutal flagrum, forced to carry the crossbar to the execution site, nailed or bound to the wood, and monitored until life officially ceased. Among the standard military equipment carried by Roman infantry and officers in Judea was the heavy spear, known in Latin as the lancia or pilum. While the pilum was traditionally a throwing javelin designed to pierce enemy shields, the lancia was a versatile thrusting spear, possessing a broad, leaf-shaped iron blade designed to inflict immediate, lethal internal hemorrhaging. For a Roman soldier tasked with confirming the death of a crucified prisoner, a precise thrust of the lancia into the chest cavity was a standard, pragmatic tactical measure. It was not an act of random cruelty. It was an imperial death certificate, written in iron.
The soldier whom early Christian tradition names Longinus, a name derived from the Greek word lonche, meaning lance or spearhead, was a career officer who had spent decades in the Roman war machine. Archaeological excavations across Judea, including military inscriptions found at Caesarea Maritima and Jerusalem, confirm the heavy presence of auxiliary units such as the cohors Second Italica and the cohors Sebastinorum during the reign of Tiberius Caesar. Soldiers serving in these garrisons were seasoned veterans, conditioned to view human life through the cold lens of imperial necessity. They carried out dozens, if not hundreds, of executions without a second thought. to Longinus, the quiet preacher from Nazareth brought to Golgotha on an April afternoon, was simply another political agitator destined for an anonymous grave. On the hill of Golgotha, known as the Place of the Skull, the afternoon sun beat down on a scene of total desolation.
3 men hung suspended on wooden crosses against a sky that was rapidly and inexplicably darkening. It was approximately 3 o'clock in the afternoon. As the Sabbath approached, the local religious authorities requested that the legs of the condemned be broken, a brutal process called crurifragium. By shattering the shin bones with an iron mallet, the victims could no longer push themselves up to take a breath, accelerating death by asphyxiation so the bodies could be removed from the crosses before sunset. The Roman soldiers moved systematically down the line, breaking the legs of the first thief, and then the second. But when Longinus and his men approached the central cross, they noticed something unusual. Jesus of Nazareth appeared to be dead already. His head hung heavy on his chest, and his body was completely still. Yet, in military execution, appearances were not enough.
Allowing a condemned rebel to be taken down from a cross while still alive carried a penalty of death for the guards themselves. Longinus had to be absolute in his certainty. Stepping forward, Longinus raised his heavy lancia and delivered a powerful upward thrust into the right side of Christ's chest. The broad iron blade pierced through the intercostal muscles between the ribs, punctured the right lung, and penetrated deep into the pericardial sac surrounding the heart. What happened next baffled the veteran soldier and has fascinated medical experts for 2 millennia. As the iron tip was withdrawn, an immediate, distinct flow of blood and water poured forth from the wound. Modern medical analysis offers a profound perspective on this recorded anomaly. When a human body undergoes extreme physical trauma, severe beatings, and the prolonged circulatory shock of crucifixion, fluids accumulate in significant quantities within the pericardial sac surrounding the heart and the pleural cavity surrounding the lungs. This condition, known medically as pericardial and pleural effusion, results in a clear, watery fluid separating from the red blood cells. A spear thrust entering the right chest cavity would puncture both the fluid-filled pericardium and the blood-filled heart chambers, resulting in a dual stream of clear water and thick blood. To the Apostle John, who recorded the event as an eyewitness, this phenomenon was a profound spiritual sign. To Longinus, standing at the foot of the cross, it was the physical proof that the man was undeniably dead. Yet, at the exact moment that steel touched the heart of God, the natural world seemed to shatter around the Roman executioner.
The mid-afternoon darkness that had shrouded Judea culminated in a sudden, violent earthquake. The earth trembled, massive rocks split open, and distant echoes from the city revealed that the heavy, woven veil of the temple in Jerusalem had been torn in two from top to bottom. Longinus was a pagan soldier, raised in a culture that believed gods manifested their wrath through cosmic omens, solar eclipses, and seismic tremors. But what he experienced on Golgotha went far beyond pagan superstition. As he looked up at the lifeless, pierced body of Christ, surrounded by the trembling earth and the unnatural darkness, the hardened shell of his military conditioning cracked wide open. In a moment of divine epiphany that echoed across the Roman Empire, the man who had delivered the final death blow cried out to the surrounding darkness. The Gospel accounts capture his sudden, radical confession of faith. Luke records him declaring, "Certainly this was a righteous man."
Mark and Matthew record his unshakable witness. Truly, this man was the Son of God. In that single, breathless moment, the professional executioner became the world's first Gentile convert at the foot of the cross. The blood and water that streamed down the shaft of his spear did not just prove the death of a victim. According to early church tradition, Drops of that sacred fluid struck Longinus's eyes, instantly healing him of a worsening eye condition and opening his spiritual vision to behold the creator of the cosmos. Following the crucifixion, Longinus was assigned one final imperial duty regarding Jesus of Nazareth: securing the tomb. The Jewish leadership, fearing that Christ's disciples might steal the body and claim he had risen, petitioned Pontius Pilate for a military guard to seal and watch the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. Longinus and his detachment of soldiers placed the Roman imperial seal upon the heavy stone and stood watch in the cold darkness of the garden.
On the third morning, the earth shook once again. Early Christian writings, including the apocryphal Acts of Pilate and ancient hagiographies, recount that an angel of the Lord descended in blinding light, rolling back the massive stone. The Roman guards were struck with overwhelming terror, falling to the ground like dead men. When Longinus recovered his senses and peered into the empty tomb, he did not see evidence of a grave robbery. He saw the abandoned grave clothes lying neatly folded, witnessing the physical reality of the resurrection. When the terrified guards reported these events to the chief priests, the Sanhedrin offered them a massive bribe of silver to spread a state-sponsored lie: that the disciples had come by night and stolen the body while the soldiers were sleeping. For a Roman soldier, admitting to falling asleep on guard duty was a capital offense, but the religious leaders promised to intercede with Pilate to protect them. Most of the soldiers took the money and kept silent, but Longinus refused. His conscience could not be bought with imperial silver. He had touched the blood of the crucified king. He had felt the earth shake at his death, and now he had witnessed his victory over the grave. To take a bribe to cover up the greatest event in human history was an impossibility for a man whose soul had been awakened to eternal truth. Longinus made a radical, irrevocable decision. He abandoned his high-ranking military commission. In the Roman Empire, abandoning one's post or deserting the legion, especially while on active duty in a frontier province, was high treason against Caesar, punishable by public execution. Yet Longinus stripped off his armor, laid down his spear, and resigned from the service of Rome. Along with two fellow soldiers who had witnessed the crucifixion and resurrection alongside him, Longinus embraced a new allegiance. He ceased to be an officer of the Roman Empire. He became a soldier of the resurrected Christ. Realizing that remaining in Jerusalem meant certain arrest and execution, Longinus and his two companions fled Judea. They traveled north across the desert trade routes to Longinus's native homeland of Cappadocia, a rugged, mountainous region in Central Asia Minor. There, in the towns and villages of his youth, the former executioner began to preach. Picture the scene in the public squares of Cappadocia. A former Roman Centurion, scarred by years of war, standing before crowds of villagers, not with a sword in his hand, but with the gospel of peace on his lips. He did not preach a theoretical philosophy. He preached as an eyewitness. He would tell the astonished crowds, "I was the man who held the spear. I was the one who oversaw his execution. I felt the earth shatter when he breathed his last, and I saw his tomb empty on the third day." His testimony carried an unshakable, terrifying authenticity. How could anyone doubt a man who had everything to lose: his wealth, his status, his military pension, and his very life, by testifying to the divinity of a man he himself had put to death? Under Roman law, Longinus's actions constituted a double crime: desertio, the desertion of his military oath, and the adoption of a religio illicita, an illegal superstition that denied the divinity of Caesar. The Roman state viewed such desertion for faith not merely as a personal choice, but as a dangerous, treasonous movement that threatened the discipline and cohesion of the imperial war machine. Word of Longinus's preaching in Cappadocia eventually made its way back to Jerusalem and Rome. Pontius Pilate, Furious at the soldier's betrayal and determined to silence an eyewitness who threatened the official Roman narrative surrounding Jesus, issued a formal warrant for his arrest. Orders were dispatched to the local governor of Cappadocia to track down the former centurion and execute him for high treason. When the Roman arrest squad arrived in the town where Longinus was staying, they did not recognize the former military officer who had traded his armor for simple civilian clothes. Seeing travelers tired from their journey, Longinus welcomed the soldiers into his home with profound hospitality. He washed their feet, set a bountiful feast of bread and wine before them, and cared for them as honored guests. As they ate, the soldiers revealed the purpose of their mission, explaining that they had been sent by Caesar and Pilate to hunt down and execute a traitor named Longinus, a former centurion who was spreading a dangerous superstition about a resurrected Jewish prophet. Without a trace of fear, Longinus smiled and told his guests that he knew where Longinus was, promising to lead them to him the following morning. That night, Longinus spent his final hours in deep prayer, preparing his soul for martyrdom. He dressed himself in white burial garments, symbolizing his readiness to meet his Lord. The next morning, Longinus gathered his 2 faithful soldier companions who had fled Jerusalem with him, stood before his Roman guests, and quietly revealed his identity. "I am Longinus, the man you seek, and these are my brothers who stood with me at the cross." The Roman soldiers were paralyzed with shock and guilt. They had spent the night receiving the warm hospitality of the very man they had been ordered to kill. Overcome with emotion, they refused to draw their swords, weeping and begging Longinus to forgive them and to flee into the mountains. But Longinus refused to run. His transformation from a hardened killer into a saint was complete. Decades earlier, he had lived by the sword, enforcing the brutal will of an earthly empire through violence and fear. Now he displayed a peaceful, radical defiance that baffled his executioners. He told the soldiers that executing their orders was an act of duty, and that dying for Christ was not a punishment, but his supreme joy and final victory. He embraced them, forgave them, and willingly led them to the place of execution. Longinus and his 2 companions were beheaded. According to ancient hagiographical accounts, his severed head was brought back to Jerusalem as proof of his execution and thrown into a city rubbish heap. Later, a blind Christian woman from Cappadocia, searching for healing, was miraculously guided in a vision to find the head of the martyr. When she touched it, her sight was instantly restored, echoing the original miracle of physical and spiritual healing that Longinus had experienced at the foot of the cross. The martyrdom of Longinus sent shockwaves through the early underground church in the East. His death was not a defeat, it was a triumphant proclamation of the gospel. If a high-ranking executioner, the very man who delivered the fatal blow to the Son of God, could be so thoroughly transformed by grace that he welcomed his own executioners with love and laid down his life without striking back, then the power of Rome was fundamentally broken. His witness proved that the kingdom of Christ operated on a spiritual plane that no imperial legion could ever conquer. The story of Saint Longinus did not end with his martyrdom in Cappadocia. His physical legacy became intertwined with one of the most famous, mysterious relics in human history, the Holy Lance, also known as the Spear of Destiny. Throughout the Middle Ages and into the modern era, several ancient iron spearheads emerged across the Christian world, each claiming to be the weapon that pierced the side of Christ. The most famous of these is the Hofburg lance, housed in the imperial treasury in Vienna, Austria.
This magnificent artifact, featuring a brass sleeve wrapping an ancient iron spearhead with a silver wire enclosing an ancient iron nail, became a central symbol of divine authority for the Holy Roman emperors. Emperors like Charlemagne, Otto the Great, and Frederick Barbarossa carried the lance into battle, believing that whoever possessed the weapon held the destiny of nations in their hands. Another ancient candidate for the Holy Lance resides in the Holy See of Echmiadzin in Armenia, a primitive, diamond-shaped iron blade said to have been brought to the east by the Apostle Thaddeus. A third relic, preserved beneath the towering dome of St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican, is believed by many historians to be the tip of the lance that was recovered from Constantinople after the fall of the Byzantine Empire.
While scientific testing on these various relics yields complex historical dates, some pointing to the Roman era, others to the medieval period, the physical reality of the spear is secondary to the profound spiritual archetype that Longinus represents. In a world often obsessed with judgment, cancellation, and unforgivable pasts, the story of Saint Longinus shines as the ultimate historical case study for the concept of radical grace. Longinus was not a casual bystander or an innocent victim. He was a perpetrator. He was a professional killer, an agent of imperial oppression, and the man who physically drove iron into the flesh of the Savior. By any human metric of justice, Longinus should have been the most condemned man in history. Yet Christianity makes a radical, mind-bending claim. No human being is beyond the reach of divine redemption.
The cross was not a place where God held a grudge against his executioners. It was the place where Christ prayed. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." The flow of blood and water from the side of Christ did not pollute the spear that struck him. It sanctified the spear, transformed the killer into a saint, and turned an instrument of execution into a monument of eternal mercy. Saint Longinus remains a timeless beacon of hope for anyone who feels weighed down by past mistakes, guilt, or the belief that they are too far gone to be forgiven. His life proves that grace does not ask where you have been, only where you are willing to walk today. The man who stood in the deepest shadow of the cross ended his journey standing in the eternal light of the resurrection. As we conclude this investigation into the life, historical evidence, and miraculous redemption of Saint Longinus, we leave you with a question to ponder. In a world that so easily condemns and writes people off, how does the radical transformation of a Roman executioner challenge your understanding of forgiveness and grace? Can someone's darkest moment truly become the doorway to their greatest purpose? We invite you to share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. If this deep dive into historical theology and early church history resonated with you, please leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who needs to hear a message of hope and redemption today. Thank you for watching, and may the truth of radical grace guide your path.